AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
By 2021, hope was running out for answers in Leslie's unsolved murder. Leslie's parents were now deceased. Carl had passed away in 2017, never having fully been cleared of killing his wife and still suspected by some of Leslie's siblings. He had never remarried. A case file review was conducted by the Missing Person Cold Case Unit Supervisor during the week of February 27, 2021. It was determined that all the investigative strategies in the Preer case had been exhausted. That was about to change. In early 2022, Detective Tara Augustin was transferred from robberies to the Cold Case Unit, joining forces with another veteran officer, Detective Allison Dupuy. In February of 2022, Detective Augustin reviewed the Preer case file and the investigators' theories. She noted that early investigators very strongly suspected Carl. After they finally moved on from him, they felt it was unknown whether Leslie knew her attacker, but they didn't believe the crime was sexually motivated or an attempted burglary or robbery gone wrong. Then why the heck had someone repeatedly bashed Leslie's head into the baseboard molding? Detective Augustin wanted to find out, and luck was on her side. She discovered that there was plenty of evidence still in the evidence boxes. A lot of it was hairs found on Leslie and in the house. But swabs from the blood samples containing foreign male DNA were still sealed up in evidence envelopes, ripe for testing. 2 swabs were selected to be sent to the lab. The swab from the kitchen dining room door frame and the swab from the interior rear kitchen door. The samples were sent to Parabon on April 25, 2022. Meanwhile, Detective Augustin did all the things cold case detectives do when they reopen cases. She contacted Leslie's sister Blair and arranged to sit down with her on April 1st to discuss what she was doing. She also contacted Lauren and introduced herself and apprised her of the latest actions taken on the case. Lauren was thrilled to learn that her mother's case was getting a fresh look. She told Detective Augustin that the 2001 investigators focused too much on Carl and trying to pin the murder on him, and that had possibly prevented them from finding the real killer. Because the detectives had zeroed in on Carl, Leslie's extended family also came to believe that he was guilty, and that was very hard for him. She herself was positive Carl had nothing to do with it. A Montgomery County PD press release dated May 5, 2022, announced that detectives from the Montgomery County Department of Police Cold Case Section continued to investigate the unsolved homicide of Leslie Jennings Preer. It gave the very basic facts of the case and requested tips, offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the suspect. Fox 5 also ran a story about the unsolved case. By now, the Preer home had been torn down and a new one rebuilt in its spot. Detective Augustin walked the neighborhood and re-interviewed Marcia, the neighbor who took care of Boomer after the murder. She was still living there after all those years. Marcia told Detective Augustin she never believed Carl had anything to do with it. Detective Augustin also interviewed a lot of other people, Leslie's cousin Shelley, with whom she had spent an hour on the phone a couple of days before she was murdered, Gail, Leslie's friend from work who had remained close with Lauren after the slaying, and Meg B., the former neighbor who said she had seen Carl that morning. After the Fox 5 piece ran, a tip came in from a neighbor and high school classmate of Lauren's named John C. He thought he should call in his suspicion of another neighbor, James Wimmel. John had no basis for his suspicions of Wimmel other than that he had taken his own life after Leslie's murder, and it seemed odd since he seemed to have everything going for him. Oddly, Wimmel was the owner of the house rented by Meg B., right next to the Preers. Wimmel and his family had lived on the street but had moved to another neighborhood before the murder. Wimmel was described by Meg B. as handsome, flirty, and sociable. After the murder, Meg had asked him to install a security system in her home, and she found it odd that he seemed hesitant to do so, not seeing any urgency for a young mother living alone despite the unsolved murder next door. Detective Augustin arranged for a blood card from Wimmel's autopsy to be collected and submitted for comparison. Testing on the sample excluded him. You may recall that Maryland has the most stringent IGG laws in the nation, requiring judicial oversight of any IGG investigation. The supervisor of the Major Crime Division, Missing Persons and Cold Case Section, Sergeant Christopher Holmrock, submitted a request for funding for an IGG investigation. His memo explained that all avenues of investigation had been exhausted in the case, including looking into similar attacks and robberies and burglaries in the area in the same time frame, including interviewing and DNA testing Leslie's coworkers and past coworkers, including conducting a thorough neighborhood canvass and requesting DNA samples, including issuing crime solvers and media requests for information, and finally, extensively reviewing Leslie's financial and phone records. Sergeant Holmrock's memo says, quote, "The missing person cold case unit held a group roundtable discussion on this case on May 12, 2022. After a lengthy review, no new traditional investigative steps were thought of that would potentially further this case," end quote. So the agency formally requested that they be permitted to outsource the unknown male DNA to Othram Labs. The state's attorney's office signed an affidavit certifying that the statutory criteria had been satisfied and requesting the approval of the IGG investigation. It's kind of crazy how much all these statutory hoops slow down the process. On September 1st, 2022, Detective Augustin and Assistant State's Attorney Donna Fenton sought an audience with Circuit Court Judge Cheryl McCallie to submit the affidavit and memo setting forth the reasons the investigators felt it was necessary to do an IGG investigation. The affidavit laid out the facts of the case, the extent of the investigation, and stated, quote, "In 23 years, the unknown male whose DNA was at the crime scene has not been identified. The MCPD believes that all other reasonable investigative methods have been exhausted, and the use of IGG and familial searching is necessary to continue the investigation." Judge McCallie approved the request, and one of the blood samples taken from the scene that contained unknown male DNA was sent to Othram Labs on September 9, 2022. I don't know why the agency pivoted from Parabon to Othram. I was told that the Montgomery County PD has used both labs extensively. For whatever reason, this time it was Othram. Othram generated a SNP profile and uploaded the suspect's SNP profile into Family Tree DNA's open source database. The results were somewhat disappointing. There were a large number of matches, but they were all low-level ones. Othram's report to the agency included that there were some higher-level matches, but they were outside the U.S. The Montgomery County PD started to tackle the genealogy in-house. Detective Stephen Smugreski, known as Smugs, whom I've discussed before in other episodes, worked with Detectives Augustin and DuPuy on the IGG. They toiled on the low-level U.S. matches for about 18 months before turning to two higher matches, women in Romania who had uploaded their DNA to one of the open-source databases accessible to law enforcement. The detectives started working the trees of the Romanian women and trying to connect them to the U.S.-based low-level matches. All in all, it took about 2 years. And then Detective Augustin found a surname in the Romanian/U.S. family tree that stopped her in her tracks. She said that she and Detective DuPuy basically freaked out. They knew this was it. The surname was Gligor. Gligor. Why was that name so familiar? Well, because it was in the case file, multiple times. That was our ha-ha moment, Sergeant Holmrock told the Washington Post. A tip had come into the Montgomery County PD on January 30th, 2002, suggesting that police look at Eugene Theodore Gligor. The caller, a retired schoolteacher named Jan, was a former neighbor of this Eugene Gligor. Gligor and his mom, Judy G., had moved into Jan's Rockville neighborhood around November of 1997, when Gligor was attending BCC High School. This neighbor, Jan, said that she had learned that her former neighbor Gligor had been a boyfriend of Lauren Preer, Leslie's daughter, in 1998. She thought she would call it in because she thought there was a possibility that Gligor had something to do with Leslie's murder. Jan reported that police were often called to the Gligor residence for noise complaints, underage drinking, drugs, and general nuisance calls, even vandalizing property. She herself had called at times after witnessing drug deals on the front doorstep of the Gligor home. She said Gligor was suspected of a B&E of a neighbor's home, which resulted in some missing money. Judy and her son Eugene had moved away in August or September of 2001, but about a week before they moved out, Jan spoke with Judy on the street. She asked her about the wholesome-looking girlfriend her son Eugene had been with a lot a few years earlier, but whom she hadn't seen lately. This was Lauren. Judy said that both of her sons went to high school with Lauren. Eugene dated her until about 1998, and her mother had recently been killed in her Chevy Chase home. Quote, she said Eugene had called and given his condolences to the girl, end quote. Jan hadn't noticed any behavioral changes in Eugene over the summer of 2001. She did notice that he had a new gold-colored Nissan Coupe, but Jan clearly felt that Gligor was a little punk, and she had good instincts. After this tip came in, Detective Turner did dig into Eugene Gligor a little bit, but he never actually interviewed him or even located him. The tip slipped through the cracks. This was not the only time that Gligor's name appeared in the case file. His name had been mentioned by Lauren as someone she had formerly dated, and her boyfriend at the time of the murder, Scott Kay, had mentioned Gligor as well. His name was on a handwritten list Detective Augustin penned in 2022, naming men who had not been DNA tested in the case. Her notes about him said, Eugene Theodore Gligor went to school with Lauren, dated around 1998, CDS, theft, trespassing. Yes, Gligor had a record as a teen for drugs and property crimes. Gligor's name also appeared in Detective Golian's notes from circa 2011, when he went back and reviewed the reports about a burglary that had happened at the Preers, Drummond Avenue home 7 years before Leslie's murder, in November of 1994. His notes indicate that 2 high school boys chased the burglary suspect, a David Yu. Their names were John T. and Eugene Gligor. There was no more about that other than Golian wrote numerous hits next to Gligor's name, meaning that he ran him through the system and noted numerous law enforcement contacts, but nothing that would warrant his DNA being placed in the state or federal DNA databases. But then in 2011, Detective Golian re-interviewed Lauren Preer. This is when he was focusing on the potential suspect Jim M. Lauren happened to mention that she had a boyfriend in high school named Eugene Gligor. Golian's notes from this interview say about Lauren's description of Gligor, quote, weird and a drug user. David, this was her later boyfriend David Yu, knew him well. Her father Carl thought he was odd. His father is very wealthy and lives in Bethesda. What upset her the most about him was his family. His parents were friendly with Lauren's parents, attended the funeral, but Eugene sent his girlfriend Maureen in his place, end quote. The man whom the IGG had settled on as a possible suspect from a DNA standpoint, Eugene Gligor, occupied the perfect spot in the suspect's family tree, DNA-wise, to be the killer. He was a first cousin twice removed to the top female match found in Romania, and he had dated Lauren Preer for more than 4 years. It was time to get a DNA sample.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
The investigators learned that Gligor was overseas and was expected to return to the U.S. on June 9, 2024, on United Flight 919 to Dulles. He landed at 2:55 p.m., and as he was on an international flight, was obliged to pass through customs. Detective Dan Ford was on site prepared to execute a brilliant plan to obtain Eugene Gligor's DNA. The detectives requested that the customs agent flag Gligor for a secondary screening. It worked to their advantage that secondary screenings after international travel can be done at random, so this additional step would not necessarily raise an alarm in Gligor's mind. Before he arrived, the officers prepared the screening room. They made sure the trash was empty, and there was nothing in the room except for 4 small unopened bottles of water and some bags of chips that they placed there using gloves. They photographed the setup in the room and then stepped away. When Gligor was brought into the room, the door remained open so the detectives could observe everything that happened. Gligor sat on the couch in the room and was handed a pen and a customs form. Officer Michelle Webster of Customs and Border Patrol conducted a brief interview. During the interview, the officers observed Gligor select a bottle of water from a table and put it into his mouth and drink. He actually finished the bottle of water and set it back on the table. When the interview was over, he left the room, leaving the water bottle behind. Once Gligor was gone, Detective Welter entered the room and photographed everything. Then he collected the used water bottle and the pen that Gligor had touched and bagged them both and delivered them to Detective Augustin. The lab report dated June 14th stated that the single-source DNA profile from the water bottle was a match to the prior crime scene blood and the scrapings from under Leslie's nails. Those DNA testing results gave rise to probable cause to arrest. A warrant was obtained charging Eugene Gligor with the first-degree murder of Leslie Prier. On the morning of June 18, 2024, Montgomery County PD Detective Ford and some burly members of the U.S. Marshal Service staked out the high-rise where Gligor rented an apartment at 1425 T Street Northwest. They knew that Gligor worked from home and decided to wait for him to emerge. They would soon get very lucky. At approximately 9:50 a.m., Detective Ford observed a white male exit the front door of the building and take a seat on the front steps. He appeared to be the man in the photographs of Eugene Gligor, reviewed by the officers. He was wearing a black shirt, a black baseball hat, and glasses, and sat there sipping his coffee and scrolling on his phone. Detective Ford radioed to his team, waiting nearby in unmarked vans. At 9:54 a.m., the Repeat Offender Unit and U.S. Marshals Task Force, dressed in civilian clothes consisting of baggy gym shorts and T-shirts, swarmed the front area of the building and quickly approached Gligor. They drew their guns and yelled, "Hands up! Hands up!" I couldn't see much in the bouncy body cam footage, but apparently Gligor did not put his hands up quickly enough, and this pissed off one of the officers. "What the fuck is wrong with you, man?" one of them said. "Put your hands behind your back." "What's going on?" Gligor asked, clearly stunned. "What is this about?" "You got a warrant, bro." Another officer said, "Would you fucking listen to us before someone gets hurt, man?" They searched him and cuffed him. As they led Gligor to a waiting vehicle, he said, Can you let my girlfriend know?" Yeah, we will," an officer said curtly. "Can you tell me what this is about?" he asked again. "Yeah, you have a warrant." "For what?" "I don't know. Did you do anything recently?" "No," Gligor said. Explaining the need for weapons, force, and the use of multiple F-bombs in the takedown, an officer told the suspect, "We can't pretend just because you look like a businessman that you aren't going to hurt us." "I understand," Gligor said. Another officer assured Gligor that his boss was going to come down and explain the warrant to him, and then the magistrate would decide whether they were going to keep him or let him go. Well, they kept him. Officer Green drove Gligor in a cruiser to the custody of the D.C. Metropolitan Police, which charged him as a fugitive from justice. His hat, sunglasses, clothing, cell phone, belt, and vape were all collected, and his intake form reflected that he was 6 foot tall, 160 pounds. Within 2 days, on June 20th, he was extradited to Montgomery County, Maryland. At the MCPD, a search warrant for his DNA was executed and a buccal swab collected. Then he was transported to the Montgomery County Detention Center, Central Processing Unit, and held without bond. The buccal swab DNA was, to the surprise of no one except possibly Gligor, a match. Assistant Chief Nicholas Augustine of the Montgomery County Police Department announced the arrest of Eugene Gligor in the 23-year-old homicide case of Leslie Prier. He said, quote, "It's forensic genealogy that helped us get a name or DNA relation to link that to the victim. We will go many years, whether it's 20 or 40 years, to find out the answers and hold people accountable for violent incidents that happened in the past," end quote. Gligor was interviewed on the day of his arrest by detectives Augustine and Dupuy. They left him stewing in the interview room for 2 hours, eating a bologna sandwich they provided. Then the two women entered the room and introduced themselves and said, "I'm sure you'd like to know what this is all about." He said, "I really would like to know. This has been really hard." They then read Gligor his rights. He verbally acknowledged that he understood them with an and initialed and signed a form indicating that he had received his Miranda warnings. Then they started questioning him. Detective Augustine said, "So we're working on a case that came from Chevy Chase, and when we're going through the case file, your name was in there as someone that was related to the family. We have a big list of people, friends, family, stuff like that. So do you recall back in 2001, Leslie Prier?" "Yes, that she was murdered," Gligor said. His tone was polite and calm, his voice soft. "How did you hear about the murder?" the detectives wanted to know. He said Lauren told him. "She had actually told me," he said. "She had come into where I was working at a restaurant and she had told me what happened." Gligor admitted to dating Lauren Prier for several years during his time at BCC High. He knew her family well and she knew his. They spent time at each other's houses. He said her parents were friendly and nice, but he wasn't particularly close with them. He and Lauren broke up sometime around 1998, he thought. He denied any kind of relationship with Leslie either before or after the breakup. He said he was not in touch with her or Lauren, and when Leslie was killed, he had not been to their house in years. Detective Dupuy's notes say that while he was saying all this, his hands were clenched and he was holding them tight and breathing somewhat heavily. Detective Augustine said, "We wanted to reach out to you and see if you remember or recall anything around that time when Leslie was killed, anything that you remember about your life at that time that, could be relevant." "I really don't recall," Gligor said. Detective Augustin then told Gligor that someone had left their DNA at the crime scene, someone who was involved in the murder. She asked him if he might know anything about that. He responded, I'm a little confused. To find out more and talk to me, why not just call me and ask me to come in and talk? Detective Augustin went on to say, the crime scene DNA, we have a sample of your DNA and it was compared to the crime scene DNA and it matched. So we know that you were there at the time that Leslie died. When the detectives told Gligor that it was his DNA they had found at the crime scene, he looked very bewildered and spread his hands as he quietly said, but I never gave a sample of my DNA. Technically true. They told him about the water bottle grab at Dulles. They told him the lab had obtained his DNA from the water bottle and that his DNA matched the crime scene evidence. Gligor began to be upset. He said, I don't know what to say. I have no recollection. I have no memory. I don't know what to say. I don't know. He started to cry, wailing that, I don't know. This is all very bewildering, very strange. I don't want to incriminate myself with questions. You guys are professionals. I'm not. I have to state here that at multiple times throughout the interview, Gligor said things like, I really do think I need an attorney. The first time, Detective Augustin said, that's totally fine, and we don't have to ask you any more questions, but we are going to just tell you some stuff, okay? Okay, Gligor said. Back to the moment when he started crying about not wanting to incriminate himself. They sat there for a moment, and then Detective Augustin said sharply, there's no tears coming out of your face. Gligor sobbed in a high voice. I'm very dry right now. She said, you're dry? He said, I'm very dry. I'm parched. I'm dehydrated. My eyes are bloodshot red because I'm just tired and drained and I don't know what's going on. You want me to drink water so I can tear? What the fuck is wrong with you? He's literally wailing as he utters this nonsense. The detective says, I'm just trying to say this seems a little put on. Gligor cries, in your eyes it's guilty until proven innocent. I get it. Well, honey, your DNA was at the crime scene, Detective Augustin told Gligor. He continued to claim that he recalled nothing. The detective said, we're trying to figure out how your blood was at the scene that day. Could it have been an interrupted burglary? Did you think no one was home? At this, he sobbed, there's due process. Are you saying I'm even guilty before I'm put into a court of law? He puts his face in his hands and then looks up, suddenly saying in a slower, deeper, calmer voice, I don't have any recollection of being involved with any of this. The detective says, you keep saying you don't have any recollection or you weren't involved, but if somebody was not involved, it would be an adamant, I didn't do it. Gligor quickly looked up and vehemently asserted, oh, I didn't do it. I definitely didn't do it. I know I wasn't involved, and I just don't understand how this has come to this, he said. I really wish I knew, and I really wish I could tell you, give you some answers, and give you more feedback from an honest perspective. There was some more back and forth, and then Gligor said, I mean, what do you think happened? I don't know. I can't verify. I don't know. I don't recall. I don't have any memory. I didn't do anything that you're talking about, so I don't know, and I don't feel like I don't know how to answer you or I don't want to incriminate myself with questions. You guys are professionals. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I feel a little bit trapped here. Detective Augustin retorted, well, you're under arrest. You should feel trapped. Gligor said, I asked for legal representation and you guys are very smug looking at me like I've done something. And of course, it's innocent until proven guilty, right? Am I wrong or right? You are entitled to your due process, absolutely, responded Detective Dupuy. This is insane, Gligor said. The interview was terminated after 24 minutes. Gligor stood up and his hands were cuffed behind his back. After the end of the interview, Gligor was placed in a cell and within days was extradited to Maryland. He was not interviewed again because he had invoked his right to counsel.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
So who is this Eugene Gligor? Eugene Theodore Gligor was born on November 9, 1979, to father Virgil Doran Gligor and mother Judith Graves. His father was born in Romania and received the majority of his education there, but moved to the U.S. in his late teens where, according to Wikipedia, he received his Bachelor of Science, Master's of Science, and Ph.D. degrees from the University of California, Berkeley. Both Gligor's parents were admirably accomplished, quite typical of residents of the greater D.C. area. His father was a tenured professor of computer and network security at University of Maryland, and then at Carnegie Mellon. And his mother, a Cornell graduate, was an economist at the World Bank. Gligor attended BCC High School in Bethesda after he was expelled from a boarding school within 2 months of enrolling. I really wish I knew what he did to get kicked out. According to Lauren, her 2 years younger boyfriend of more than 4 years, Gligor, was very impacted by the contentious divorce of his parents. His mom had left her job to stay home with Gligor and his brother Andre, and when her marriage split up and Gligor lived with his mom, he got into quite a bit of trouble. He was, to put it bluntly, a hoodlum. In divorce papers between his parents, his father Virgil alleged that Judith, quote, condoned the children's shoplifting, drug use, and theft of money, end quote. In high school, Gligor was considered good-looking and very popular. His parents' Kenwood mansion was a hangout spot for Lauren and many of their mutual friends. Gligor attended the University of Maryland from 1999 to 2003, according to the Washington Post. That means that about midway through college in 2001, he killed Leslie Preer. He was 21 at the time. Gligor went on to marry a woman named Jane, who told the Montgomery County detectives that her ex had been an alcoholic when they were married, and he was a danger to himself, not from deliberate self-harm, but from reckless behavior such as drinking and driving. Jane and Gligor divorced in 2015. He moved to New York and worked as the manager of Jean Georges, a very esteemed fine dining establishment. He met his second wife in New York, and the two moved back to the D.C. area. They divorced in 2021. In D.C., Gligor worked at a firm called Stealth Monitoring, which provides video surveillance services at commercial properties around the U.S., according to its website. His former and current colleagues were disbelieving about his arrest. Jordan Weirs, Gligor's mentee at a real estate company called HomeSnap, where Gligor had handled marketing and sales, said, quote, I couldn't imagine him hurting a fly. Jordan described Gligor as bubbly and extroverted. He was a happy, positive person, said Joseph McDermott, age 34, who also worked with Gligor at HomeSnap. We were all just shocked. Others who knew Gligor agreed. The Washington Post dug into his past, and his friends described him as being warm and gregarious, having sophisticated taste, and being cultured. He was in multiple fantasy football leagues. He hosted Super Bowl watch parties, went to concerts and museums, and loved to eat at fancy restaurants. He gave money to charity and was on a workplace committee charged with organizing cultural events for fellow employees. He was never violent, supposedly. In fact, he was described as Zen. He was known to be committed to self-improvement and worked hard to surmount his alcoholism, for which he attended AA meetings regularly. His high school friend Bryce told 2020 that Gligor was not a fighter. Others said he was easygoing and chill. But Gligor definitely had a dark side. I'll get into some criminal stuff in a bit, but Gligor's personal life illustrated that he had essentially had two sides, the friendly, outgoing, upbeat one he presented publicly, and the ugly one that emerged when he was crossed. Gligor filed a complaint for absolute divorce in November 2021 against his wife, Julie, whom he had married in 2017 after 2 years of dating. The complaint states simply that the two had been voluntarily living separately for several months, and the separation was beyond any reasonable expectation of reconciling. According to Julie, part of the reason for the divorce was that Gligor was an alcoholic. After the divorce was initiated, there was a terrifying incident in which Julie applied for a restraining order against Gligor. On December 11, 2021, he came by their formerly shared house, which Julie still lived in, to pick up some of his things. He had not gotten her permission to stop by or her consent to come in and get his stuff. Julie had her new boyfriend over. He was upstairs when she opened the door. She told Gligor he had to leave as she had someone else over. He said, I don't care, do what you want. I was with another woman last night. Sure you were. Julie told Gligor she would wait upstairs while he gathered his things and left. While she was upstairs, she heard things crashing around, and she went back down, and he was pacing around on his cell phone saying, she's fucking someone else in my house. Mind you, this was her house. He said he had called friends to come over and take care of the man she had over, and he started trying to push past Julie to get up the stairs to get at her boyfriend. He called her a whore, and when she yelled at him to leave, he said he was going to get a knife and stab himself in the hand and call 911. Julie was done with this bullshit, and she herself called 911. Gligor also called 911 and reported that there was a man in his house. Gligor told the police that Julie should not have another man in his house and that he wanted to be able to deal with her boyfriend like a man. They ordered him to leave, and he did drive away, but Julie found out later that he had parked nearby, probably watching to see when the boyfriend left. Julie ended up filing for the restraining order, reporting that her ex-husband was an addict and owned 2 guns. She said his behavior was erratic, unpredictable, and scary, and had been off and on over the past couple of years. She wrote in her restraining order application, quote, Eugene repeatedly calls me a whore and yells in my face. He throws objects, punches walls, and I fear for my safety when he has these outbursts. He yells at me about how he's an alcoholic and that I don't get it. I'm afraid for my safety, and I'm seeking protection from this verbal abuse and escalation. Well, a judge denied Julie's restraining order, saying Julie had no evidence of abuse. I guess women have to actually be beaten up in order to warrant legal protection. But the divorce was granted in March of 2022. In 2023, Gligor wrote Julie a letter saying he was in rehab and trying to make amends. The Washington Post did locate a co-worker of Gligor's who saw through his facade. Quote, another one of Gligor's colleagues, Michael Kyle, said Gligor could have a temper. He described him as defensive when challenged, like one time when Kyle confronted him about comments on a work call that he found problematic. Some people are receptive and warm, Kyle said. He does that at first when he meets everybody, but then is a giant, condescending prick. When Gligor was arrested in June of 2024, he was already living with his new girlfriend, Laura, a yoga instructor. So what was on Gligor's criminal record? Not a lot, but not nothing either. He had arrests in his younger years for weapons possession, driving under the influence, and theft. Detective Augustin located additional incident reports in the Montgomery County PD files in which Gligor was listed as a suspect in several residential thefts and burglaries, but didn't end up being charged. He also had one arrest for possession of marijuana. After the arrest of Gligor for the murder of her mom, Lauren Prier told the Washington Post that for 23 years she had agonized over what happened to her mom. Scared for her own safety, she purchased a pistol and always carried pepper spray. She told the paper when the detectives called, saying, "We know who killed your mom. We have evidence. It was Eugene Gligor." She was shocked. And then she was angry. In a post-arrest interview, Lauren told Detective Augustin that she dated Gligor when she was 15, until she was in college for a year or two. She was 2 years older than he was. They met when she was in high school, and his family lived about a 10-minute walk away from her Somerset neighborhood. He lived on Brookside Drive in the upscale Kenwood community. A walking trail connected the two neighborhoods. As a teen boy, Lauren said Gligor had treated her with sensitivity. She told DC News Now, quote, "We've known each other since I was 15. He was always gentle and sweet. Never saw him in a fight. He was never mean to me," end quote. This from the Washington Post, quote, in high school, Prier said she liked Gligor for his good looks, deep brown hair and a wide smile, and because everyone liked him. He was gregarious and sweet. He was friends with her friends at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School, where they were both students. They liked to go to hip-hop shows and sneak into country clubs to sled down hills blanketed in snow. He wanted to be a computer engineer. Their families lived close by, Prier said, so they spent time at each other's houses. Her dad would barbecue, her mom would cook pasta, and they would eat around the kitchen island. He would join her family on trips to a lake near the Outer Banks and beaches in Delaware and Maryland, where the four of them played games of life and parcheesi. She never noticed anything out of the ordinary. "We were just kids," she said, end quote, all that from the Post. Lauren told 2020 that Gligor was her first love. The young couple dated for nearly 5 years, an eternity in terms of teenage relationships. Lauren helped him through his parents' 1994 divorce, and as you heard, he spent a lot of time with her family, perhaps seeking the stable environment he did not have in his own life. They tried long-distance dating when Lauren went off to college. Gligor still had 2 more years of high school. But after almost 2 years of that, they broke up at Lauren's gentle insistence. She had limited contact with him after that, and he failed to attend her mom's funeral, which was surprising to her. She ran into him soon after when he was working at Black's Bar in Bethesda. She told the Washington Post that when she told him her mom had died, he simply said, "I'm so sorry." After that, they saw each other only occasionally in incidental run-ins with mutual friends. Lauren said that she was aware that certain members of Gligor's family were prone to violent rages, but Gligor himself never exhibited those. It had never occurred to her that he could be responsible for bashing her mother's head into the baseboard moldings and strangling her until her eyes bled. Nonetheless, she had included the name Eugene Gligor when the 2001 detectives asked her for a list of those acquainted with her mother. From Detective Augustin's notes of this interview with Lauren, quote, she said she last saw Gligor at a D.C. restaurant after a memorial service for a mutual friend in 2019. They talked one-on-one. Her mom did not come up in conversation, end quote. But Lauren recognized that, quote, mom would have opened the door for him for sure, end quote. She said her dad, Carl, always suspected Gligor and didn't trust him. He told her, "There's something off about your boyfriend." She found out later that he broke into cars and stole stuff. Lauren spoke publicly after the arrest, giving a brief statement outside the courthouse. She said she was shocked by the news of her ex-boyfriend being charged with her mother's murder. "Never in 1 million years did we think our people could hurt my mom," she said. She also spoke with WTTG. "It's been a hell of a day," she told the station. "He was my ex-boyfriend." She recalled that she had bumped into Gligor at a restaurant in D.C. fairly recently. "He didn't seem weird. How can you look somebody in the eye and, knowing that he committed this crime, and act like nothing happened? It's pretty unreal," she said. When asked if Gligor was ever considered a person of interest by the family, Lauren Prier told the station, "No, not at all." Remembering that this is all about Leslie, Lauren told DC News Now of her mom, quote, "She was beautiful inside and out. She was respectful and smart and just amazing. We have an angel watching over us. She was the best. You're the best mom in the world, and I'd do anything to have one day with you," she said. DC News Now reported, quote, "Lauren Prier said 23 years later, she's been able to find some form of peace, knowing justice may soon be served. She wants her mother to be remembered for the bright spirit she was and for the welcoming person that people closest to her knew her to be," end quote. Detective Dupuy had a very interesting conversation with Lauren's high school best friend Lisa W., who of course knew Gligor well from high school. She told Detective Dupuy, quote, "Her mom was always so kind to him." Lisa said Gligor spent a lot of time over at Lauren's and knew her parents well. She also knew Gligor to be a bit of a delinquent. Quote, "He and his group of friends would break into cars and they stole money from her house," end quote. It's unclear if Lisa meant Gligor stole money from her own house or from Lauren's. She said he was into drugs and drinking. Others said he smoked a lot of pot but was never out of control. Lisa maintained Gligor's brother used drugs too. Quote, "They stole Eugene's dad's car and drove to Lisa's house, and her dad confronted them and they hit him with the car," end quote. Lisa told Detective Dupuy that in the mid-1990s, a woman was assaulted on the bike path near Gligor's parents' house, and Gligor was the primary suspect. This was made evident by the police to the point that Gligor's family, friends, and Lauren knew that Gligor was being accused of a serious crime against the woman. This from the Washington Post, quote, "Prier was so sure her then-boyfriend was sweet and sensitive that she marched down to a local police station, she believes sometime around 1995, with her best friend, to defend him when, she said, investigators thought he matched the description of someone who had assaulted a woman on the bike path between their homes," end quote. The two girls brought in their high school yearbook to show the police just how many boys in it looked like the suspect description. Lauren told the Washington Post, quote, "We both said there is no way Eugene would have done this," end quote. Sure about that?
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
Neither of Gligor's parents would agree to speak to the Montgomery County investigators, but his brother Andre sat down for an interview. Andre knew the Priers and had been to the house to dog-sit Boomer and even attended Leslie's funeral. He said it was beyond shocking that his brother had been arrested for the murder of Leslie Prier. His body language indicates that he was indeed surprised. But detectives had questions for him about things he had said about his brother. In about 2021, when Gligor's second marriage dissolved, Andre said he'd been afraid his brother would try to get him kicked out of the townhouse he was living in, which was paid for by their mother. He told the detectives that his brother did not like him and that he did suspect his brother could be dangerous. Quote, "Some days I'm scared of him," he said. Back then, in 2021, he texted Lauren, trying to find out whether his instincts about his brother were right or whether he was going crazy. She did not respond. Andre told the detectives that his brother was manipulative in his relationships and made it out that he was always the one who was wronged, no matter what the circumstances. In preparation for trial, detectives also gathered screenshots of texts from this brother Andre to Gligor's first wife, Jane, saying he could not be sure Eugene would never hurt him physically and asking her if she had ever feared him. Quote, "Do you think he has a conscience or can feel remorse?" he asked. Well, let me tell you, I've never asked that about my brother. That sounds to me as though Andre feared his sibling was a sociopath. In August of 2024, Detective Augustin interviewed a Garrett H. Garrett was a high school friend of Gligor's who had also lived with him as adults in an apartment at 7th and Q in D.C. He also knew Lauren. When Gligor and Lauren were dating, Garrett went with Gligor to Lauren's house quite often. He knew Leslie, and she had even driven them to the county fair once. Garrett had some pretty significant information. When Leslie was killed, it was Gligor who called and told him. Garrett was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. And then Gligor just showed up at his house in Oregon. Gligor told Garrett that he wasn't attending Lauren's mom's funeral because it was, quote, just a lot for me. Garrett thought that was odd and told the detectives that he himself would have gone. He didn't notice any injuries on Gligor's body. The detectives made sure to ask, but did notice that Gligor was unusually talkative and chatty. In retrospect, manic. Gligor stayed for a few days and then left. Garrett recalled that on a later occasion when Gligor was at Garrett's house, Garrett's mother brought up the Leslie Prior murder and asked Gligor about it, knowing that he had dated her daughter. She said, "Who do you think did it?" He said, "Your guess is as good as mine." I don't think it is. Garrett was still in touch with Gligor right up until the time he was arrested. They talked every few months and sent texts on birthdays and holidays. Interestingly, Garrett said that Eugene was never violent. Once, when they lived together, they got into it a little bit and Garrett pushed Gligor, but Gligor de-escalated things and didn't push back. Garrett said that Gligor drank moderately but smoked weed all the time. Remember, his next-door neighbor, Jan, had witnessed drug deals on the front stoop of the house where Gligor lived with his mom. Garrett also said that Gligor had been estranged from his father but had recently reconciled. Garrett was under the impression that there might have been violence on the part of Gligor Sr. Gligor lived with his mother after the divorce, but she didn't really give him an allowance or spending money, Garrett said. So Gligor worked in restaurants and bought all his own stuff, but he always seemed strapped for cash. Garrett recalled that once they went to a 7-Eleven to cash a traveler's check, which Gligor had stolen from his father and forged his signature and cashed. He showed Garrett he had a whole stack of them. Along the theme of what others said, that according to Gligor, everything was always someone else's fault, Gligor had told Garrett that his relationship with his second wife, Julie, had disintegrated because Julie had been cheating on him. Needless to say, he didn't mention the restraining order she applied for because he was a petulant rage monster. But here's the really interesting part. Garrett said that he and Gligor often went to Lauren's parents' house even when Lauren wasn't there. Gligor knew where she kept the spare key in the planter box on the front step. They would go in the house and watch TV until she got home. Gligor knew where the key was. Garrett speculated about what could have happened on the day of Leslie's murder. He said, "I wonder what his motivation would be to be in the home. Lauren's family had one car. Maybe he assumed no one was home and he knew where the key was. Maybe he went in to use the bathroom or use the house. I don't know." Garrett didn't seem to think that Gligor would steal from the Priors, but I am not sure I agree. The criminal case against Eugene Gligor was originally filed in Rockville District Court. At a bond hearing, Gligor's attorneys Isabel Raquin and Stephen Mercer waived Gligor's rights to have the terms of his bond reviewed. That meant that Gligor would remain held without bond. When the judge announced that he would not be released, Lauren blurted out, "Thank God." After the bond hearing, Montgomery County State's Attorney John McCarthy held a press conference. He said, "This case remained open for 23 years until now." He extolled the work of the Montgomery County Police's open cold case unit. Quote, "They did an extraordinary job, and I know that the family is very thankful for them remaining diligent." McCarthy emphasized that the state's case against Gligor was strong. Quote, "Science doesn't lie, technology doesn't lie," he said. Gligor's case was moved up to Montgomery County Circuit Court after a criminal indictment was issued. And then the defense put up a big fight. They filed motions to suppress Gligor's statements in the custodial interview with Detectives DuPois and Augustin, arguing that his 14th Amendment rights were violated by the detectives continuing to interrogate him even after he requested an attorney. I was a little surprised at the over-dramatization presented in the defense's motion to suppress. Yes, the motion claimed that Gligor invoked his right to counsel 8 separate times. Although, let's be clear, in some of these instances, Gligor's request was as vague as, "I'd like to have somebody." But the motion also tried to present the treatment of Gligor as borderline abusive. For example, it says, upon the arrest, police physically seized him and aggressively handcuffed him, restricting the flow of blood to his hands. They put him into an unventilated police cruiser. Once they arrived at the Homicide Division offices in Judiciary Square, he was kept inside the hot police cruiser for some time. Once inside the interrogation room, the officers left him alone and then returned and fed him a bologna sandwich. Notice it says fed him, not provided him with. Then his handcuffs were removed, but his legs were shackled to the floor. 2.5 hours had elapsed since his arrest. When the interrogation began, Gligor said, "This has been really, really hard, whatever is happening." He told the detectives the handcuffs were so tight, he thought he might be suffering from a blood clot. He said, Quote, I don't know if it is, but I have no idea if it is a blood clot. I've been holding my hand above my heart, so just hopefully it helps to heal, end quote. He also stated that he was cold throughout the interrogation. First he was hot in the cruiser, now he's chilly. The defense motion alleged that the detectives ignored Gleeger's obvious emotional, psychological, and physical discomfort. He told them that he felt trapped and outnumbered, and that he was dehydrated and tired. All that drama aside, the defense motion to suppress pointed out that after Gleeger said he didn't know what to do and he felt that he should talk to an attorney, the detectives presented statements to him which could foreseeably elicit a response. They said things like, that's why we wanted to talk to you, to find out if there's any other explanation, but we can't ask you any more questions if you want a lawyer present. And they said, we wanted to try and see if there was another angle or another side to the story. And you said you wanted to know more, so we are telling you more. And what we're trying to figure out is how your blood was at the scene that day. Could it have been, an interrupted burglary? Did something happen where you didn't expect anybody to be home? Gleeger's motion did not deny that his Miranda warnings were read to him and he acknowledged them in writing. But he maintained the warnings were over in only 37 seconds, he did not understand them, and the detectives continuing to speak to him after he invoked and violated his rights. Well, Judge David Lease agreed. The video of Gleeger's interrogation would not be seen by a jury. That wasn't the only motion filed by the defense. This from the Washington Post. Quote, Gleeger's attorneys, Stephen Mercer and Isabel Raquin, wrote in court papers that the scheme at Dulles to collect Gleeger's DNA, given that it wasn't related to legitimate border security issues, violated his constitutional protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The evidence collected, they wrote, should thus be barred from the case, end quote. Okay, sorry, that argument is ridiculous. We've seen time and again that ruses on the part of law enforcement designed to obtain suspect DNA are permissible. No one forced Gleeger to drink that free bottle of water in the conference room. The judge did not get the opportunity to rule on this motion, however, because the parties reached a plea deal. At a plea hearing on May 7, 2025, Eugene Gleeger pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The judge went over the disclaimers with the defendant. He asked, are you pleading guilty today freely and voluntarily? Yes, Your Honor. Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty? Yes, Your Honor. Gleeger looked down as he spoke. It was over quickly. The sentencing would be at a later date on August 28th. After the guilty plea, Montgomery County State's Attorney John McCarthy held another press conference. Lauren Preer stood by his side. He said, this case was a cold case and was a historic case for the county. For the first time in Montgomery County, familial DNA was used to solve a nearly 25-year-old murder with an arrest. By the way, he means IgG, not familial DNA. But whatever. McCarthy talked about the foreign male DNA found at the crime scene and how they obtained judicial permission as required by Maryland law to undertake a family tree building analysis. It's sort of a last resort, McCarthy said. These limitations were established by the legislature in Maryland. The limitations we have are different than some other states. In some states, familial DNA is more readily usable. Putting the family tree together was a massive investigative effort, he said. He did a little self-congratulating. DNA started here, he means in Maryland. Cellmark was the only DNA lab in America years ago. We continue to lead the way in developing DNA testing methodologies. McCarthy felt the need to explain why the state had reached a plea deal for second-degree murder with Eugene Gleeger, even though they felt they had him dead to rights because of the DNA under Leslie's fingernails. He said they had no evidence to suggest the homicide was premeditated, which would be required for a first-degree murder conviction. No motive had been provided by the defendant, he said. Further, Gleeger had no criminal record as an adult. Quote, it's very hard to establish this, that a person necessarily premeditated the killing, McCarthy said. Quote, this was a blunt force trauma case. By this, he suggests that there was no weapon. It was a spur-of-the-moment attack, implying lack of premeditation. Continuing, we've discussed this with the family internally, with some of the difficulties of going to trial and whether there would be a likelihood of a first-degree conviction. It would have been difficult to obtain. With a second-degree conviction, there is the possibility of 30 years in prison. End quote. Just to clarify, the maximum penalty at the time of the crime was 30 years, and the state asked for that. Someone convicted of second-degree murder in Maryland now would be facing 40 years. If they could have gotten Gleeger on first-degree murder, he could be sentenced to life. But Maryland's sentencing guidelines called for much less, just 10 to 18 years for a second-degree murder plea. The judge's decision at the sentencing hearing would determine how many years Gleeger actually got. McCarthy continued, Quote, "The family is very grateful to the cold case team. It doesn't bring Leslie back, but now they know who did it to her. There is no such thing as closure, but I'm proud of what we do together, and I'm proud of our continuing search to find creative ways to make people in this community safer. The family feels it's wonderful justice to have this mystery solved, to find out who took this wonderful woman from them." Jennings' family attorney Benjamin Kurtz told Fox News Digital, quote, "Lauren, her family, and friends have waited 24 years to finally get closure and justice for this horrific crime that tore her family apart. The fact that it turned out to be someone they allowed into their home with open arms just makes it that much harder to understand."
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
The sentencing hearing on August 28th of this year was open to the public. Unfortunately, I could not attend, but I sent my dad, a career journalist and author, to take notes. Much of what you will hear now about the 4-hour-long hearing is based on his observations. Gligor, wearing a green prison jumpsuit but not cuffed or shackled, sat at a table with his 2 lawyers. I was surprised to hear that the defense's lawyers and character witnesses were the first to address the court. I've typically seen the state's witnesses and the victim's impact statements from the family and friends kick things off. It's possible the prosecutors in this case wanted the last word, and that's what they got. As the defense took their turn, Lauren and other family members sat in silence. Lauren had physical support from 2 women seated on either side of her, arms intertwined. Gligor had pleaded guilty. There was nothing for the defense to do but try to mitigate things to reduce his sentence. First to speak was defense lawyer Isabel Raquin. She told the court that her client had straightened out his life and was an upstanding citizen. She said Gligor had seen the error of his ways and is a different, better person now. She said, Gligor, quote, "doesn't have a violent nature. He is fundamentally a kind person, rational, who had decades of meaningful relationships and of loving," whatever that means. "Why did he do it? We cannot explain it, Your Honor," Raquin said. She said it was a combination of circumstances, including childhood trauma that began when he was 12 and more family trauma when he was about 14. She said the defendant used alcohol, mushrooms, and cocaine, and it was in that context that he met the Prier's daughter, Lauren. Lauren, she said, was his first love. He made a mistake that was explainable by the use of cocaine and alcohol, but now, quote, Eugene has moved on. Gligor's lawyer concluded by saying that something happened in Gligor's life in 2022 that caused him to learn a lot about himself, and now his goal is to make things right and help others. Gligor's first character witness was his AA sponsor, who said, quote, "He has atoned for a lot of the errors he made. He is transformed into someone who's very honest. I know him very well. He is someone who is gentle, nonviolent, trustworthy, stable. He's got a really good attitude. He has told me that he really feels relief that he could make amends. He asks for an opportunity to demonstrate that he has changed." This male sponsor said Gligor, quote, "wants to make amends to the family and to continue to grow spiritually and psychologically. I care deeply about him," he says. Then another male friend spoke. He said, quote, "Eugene is the most even-tempered, non-aggressive person I know. The Eugene I've known for the past 4 years is the best person I know." Then a female friend of Gligor's for the past 6 years addressed Leslie's family, telling them she was so sorry for your loss. He, quote, "approaches people with curiosity, not hostility." I'm not certain who this was because my dad did not catch her name, but I believe this witness was Mary Ellen Madden, Gligor's mother's spouse. They married in 2018. Mary Ellen, born Paul Madden, is a respected attorney in Philadelphia. The next character witness was a man who runs yoga and spiritual wellness meetings Gligor regularly attends in prison. According to defense filings, while in jail awaiting trial, quote, Eugene meditates daily and writes a daily gratitude list. He has also been helping other men in jail, leading a Trauma Talks yoga class and in-pod AA group meetings. The filing maintained Gligor had been trying to better himself by taking 106 online classes, including 2 on Buddhism, which preaches nonviolence, among other things. He also took Introduction to Artificial Intelligence, The Power of Mindfulness, and Banish Your Inner Critic to Unleash Creativity. In the meetings he participated in, the wellness coach said Gligor showed, quote, compassion, dedication, and positivity, and made a significant contribution at each meeting and inspiration to others. The defense submitted 44 letters of support on Gligor's behalf, although according to the Washington Post, many of those were from fellow inmates, including a Jorge Landeros, a yoga teacher awaiting trial for the 15-year-old bludgeoning murder of American University professor Sue Ann Markham. Jorge spent 12 years on the FBI's most wanted list. He wrote that Gligor, quote, rapidly became my light in darkness, end quote. I'm not even going to comment on that. So as I said, second-degree murder was punishable by up to 30 years in prison, according to the statute in effect at the time of the murder in 2001. But the defense lawyers made their case that Gligor should be sentenced to just 10 years, citing mental health battles, a commitment to sober lifestyle, and a clean, recent record. After a break, the prosecution stepped in. Assistant State's Attorney Donna Fenton told the jury not to buy any of the new person narrative the defense was spinning. She set up a PowerPoint slideshow on a big screen visible to everyone. It showed photos of Leslie and what appears to be her big, happy family. Fenton told the court that Lauren had dated Gligor and that Leslie, the victim, opened her home to him and welcomed him into her family. She described what Gligor did to Leslie as unrelenting attack. He brutally killed her, she said matter-of-factly. Several of Leslie's siblings addressed the court with victims' impact statements. Bill Jennings thanked the prosecutors and detectives, a great team, he called them, for their dedication to securing justice for a horrendous crime. He reminded the court that his former brother-in-law, Carl, had spent the remainder of his life under a cloud of suspicion. I never thought Carl did it, Bill said, but some in my family thought he did. Another piece of trauma inflicted on the family by what Gligor did, he said. He said Gligor should get the maximum sentence allowed under his plea deal, 30 years. Additional siblings spoke about what a loving, generous, and warm person Leslie was. Her loss had an irrevocable impact on their lives that would never be diminished, they emphasized. And last up was Lauren. She read a prepared statement as a photo of her and Gligor back when they were dating in high school was displayed on the big screen. The effect was very sobering, reminding everyone of how two-faced the defendant is. She addressed Gligor, saying, "Why would you kill my mom? She was the sweetest mom. She never judged anyone. Nothing will bring her back," her voice breaking here. And then she addressed him further, "You are a monster, a wolf in sheep's clothing. You almost got away with it." The cloud of suspicion over her father, she said, never went away. But it was not just Carl who suffered. Of Lauren, the prosecuting attorneys told the court, quote, Lauren was consumed with fear and anxiety. For months, she could not shower alone, traumatized by the knowledge of where her mother's body was found. She bought clear shower curtains. To this day, the prosecutor said Lauren still checks behind closed shower curtains whenever she enters a new place. At the end, Prosecutor Fenton went nuclear on the court. She projected on the big screen color images of Leslie's underwear-clad body as it was found in the shower with all the red blood pooled on the tile shower floor. She showed close-ups of Leslie's bloodied, bruised, and battered face. According to my dad, it was shocking and many looked away. Showing the photo of Leslie's battered, lacerated face and of her bruised and lacerated torso, Fenton said, quote, "We know from these photos that she fought for her life." She told the court how Gligor had bashed Leslie's head into the sharp corner of the baseboard molding over and over 7 times, leaving the V-shaped lacerations on her head and so much blood. He punched and beat her. Then he strangled her so hard and so prolongedly that her eyes bled. He kept going and going until she was dead, Fenton emphasized. Fenton then showed the photos of the foyer floor and molding with blood all over them. And then she showed photos of the attempted cleanup of the walls and floor and the stains on the sinks in the kitchen and powder room. If Gligor was so high on coke and alcohol that he couldn't remember the event, Fenton argued, how come he had the presence of mind to try to wash Leslie's body, clean up, remove the cleanup evidence, and then drive home? I probably should explain here that in between the guilty plea and the sentencing, Gligor's attorneys, Mercer and Mercan, had submitted a lot of documents setting forth mitigating factors. They claimed that Gligor did not remember attacking Leslie or even going to the Prier home that day in May 2001 because he had been partying the night before in a cocaine and drinking binge. The defense filings maintained that Gligor's peacefulness, mindfulness, and conflict resolution skills are what made most people who knew him be in an extreme state of shock upon learning of Eugene's involvement in this case. The offense in this case, while very serious, is an aberration in the life of Mr. Gligor. Eugene only has positive memories of Leslie. I'm not buying it, and Donna Fenton was not either. She detailed the cleanup Gligor undertook, washing down the walls and floors and putting Leslie in an upstairs shower with water so hot it left burns on her body. That does not sound like someone behaving irrationally under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Prosecutor Jody Mount told the court bluntly, "This was not a mistake, this was murder. It is unimaginable," she said, "that the defense is in here asking for a sentence of 10 years. This was not one punch, one gunshot wound, one stab." Mount spoke scornfully of the convenience of these blackouts that the defendant claimed. He knew what he was doing. The family is only asking for justice. 10 years is not justice. Today is a day of reckoning for this defendant who for 23 years hid in plain sight. But the prosecution actually did not have the last word. Gligor did. He chose to address the court when the judge afforded him the opportunity to do so before handing down the sentence. He said, "Your Honor, I want to express my deepest regret, shame, and remorse for the devastating tragedy that I caused. I vaguely remember leaving the Prier house in the morning." And he did, by the way, leave by the back door where he left blood smears. "But the rest is a blur," he said. "Hours later, I remember hoping and praying that she was not dead, that she would revive. I felt so sick and disgusted with myself for what I had done. I have never been a violent person," he said, as Lauren sobbed, her face in her hands. He continued, "I know Lauren and Leslie's family want to know why I was there and what happened. I'm sorry I'm unable to remember and provide an explanation. Leslie was always very kind to me. The greatest regret of my life is taking Leslie's life." To Lauren and Leslie's family, "I am so sorry for causing you so much misery and hardship," he said, his own voice breaking just for a moment. "I am very disappointed with myself." Gligor went on for a bit about vague childhood trauma and then added, "Looking back, it's something I'm very ashamed of, but at the time," he said, "he was, quote, too terrified to turn myself in." Now, he said, he feels a moral obligation to make this right and has dedicated my life to Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever that means. Quote, "I'm sorry it's taken me this long to accept full responsibility. I'm grateful the time has come and I'm relieved the secret is over. I had many blackouts leading up to the evening of May 1 and the morning of May 2nd, 2001, but none that resulted in the most regretful and devastating event of my life. Most of the day is a blur." Just to clarify, the sentencing memo from prosecutors said that on the night of May 1st, 2001, Gligor remembered drinking shots and mixed drinks. On the morning of May 2, he basically remembered driving to work and stopping off at the Prier house around 9:30 in the morning. He recalled vaguely going into the house and having a physical altercation with Leslie. He claimed to have no recollection of cleaning up or putting her in the shower, and he provided zero insight as to why he went over there in the first place. Gligor concluded with, "Your Honor, thank you and the court for your time and consideration." Judge David Lees didn't give the sentence much consideration at all. He was ready with his pronouncement. He said, quote, "What happened to her is horrific. This was a personal crime. There was blood everywhere. There was the strangulation of somebody to death." But he said there was no point in trying to make sense of the senseless. 30 years, he said, to a brief burst of shouted celebration from Prier's family and friends, happy with the max. But it was a little premature. 8 of those years were suspended, meaning Gligor would serve only 22. He will be out of prison when he's 67 years old, unless he earns early release for good behavior, in which case he could be out in as little as 15. As the deputies led him away, Gligor smiled wanly and waved to his supporters. After the sentencing hearing, State's Attorney John McCarthy told the assembled media that Leslie came from a wonderful family who had been deprived of her presence for 23 years, all because of the actions of someone known to them, Eugene Gligor. McCarthy said, quote, "This was a vicious crime. This was a slow death with multiple instrumentalities. It was overkill. We believe aggravated by the fact that the victim was known to the defendant, even by his own admission, had treated him with nothing but kindness. We believe he lacks remorse. His decision to stay silent demonstrates that he did not have any remorse for this crime. We reject the allocution with respect to the diminished capacity of the defendant. You look at the factors in this case and you see he drove 10 miles to go to the Prier house. How intoxicated was he? He assaulted Ms. Prier and then hid the body, ran scalding water over the body to get rid of the evidence, and then he cleaned up the crime scene. He was covered in blood, but he left, didn't leave his clothes. He removed the items he wiped up the blood with, and then he fled. Everybody in his family went to the funeral, not him. He went to the West Coast. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew exactly what he had done." McCarthy continued, quote, "There was some testimony about his kindness in helping other people. What about the cruelty? This man knew this family. For 23 years he stood silent. There is cruelty in that. For 23 years, Carl was under the specter of being the killer. It actually divided the family. An innocent man lived the remainder of his life under the specter that he had taken his wife's life, and he did not. Lauren lived for 23 years with the doubt about her father's involvement. There is cruelty in that. We reject that this is a kind and thoughtful person. McCarthy gave credit to the two cold case detectives, Dupuy and Augustin, who used IGD to identify Gligor. He thanked the prosecutors for their compassion for the family. Quote, "There is no closure in these cases. It's a life sentence for Lauren not to have her mom. It was a life sentence for Carl. Leslie was one of 8 children. They were robbed of all those family moments." McCarthy again explained why the state had extended Gligor a plea deal. He said every step was discussed extensively with the family, who recognized that there are no sure things in trials and appeals. The family had already lived with this for nearly a quarter century, and a plea deal brought assured closure with him admitting his responsibility for the crime. For Gligor to confess in court really cleared Carl. This was a horrific crime, but it was the right plea in this case, he said. And the sentence was appropriate. We wanted more, McCarthy said, but it was above the Maryland sentencing guidelines, and we are happy for that. This man deserves every second of the time given by the judge. Benjamin Kurtz, Jennings' family friend and attorney, confirmed that the family had been consulted about giving Gligor a plea deal versus proceeding to trial in an attempt to get a first-degree murder verdict, and they were satisfied with the plea deal. It spared them from having to go through a trial. Then he announced that the family intended to file a civil lawsuit against Gligor for wrongful death. Bill Jennings told the assembled media, "Gligor could still be talking and it wouldn't have done anything for me. I thought his words were empty, impossible to believe. There was nothing that came out that would give any logic or motive to this crime," he said. Bill said Carl's life was cut short because of the depression he went into because of the murder and the cloud of suspicion. "These tragedies smother you," he said. Detective Tara Augustin said about the defendant, "I think it's the Eugene show in his mind, the same thing over and over. I don't believe anything he says." Gligor has filed a motion asking the court to reconsider his sentence. We all know it will be denied. Leslie Preers was one of those unsolved cases in which there was no standout suspect other than the victim's scapegoat husband. The early investigators seemed quite convinced of his guilt, despite ample evidence to the contrary. Yes, it was weird that he'd failed to look in the bathroom for his wife, and that he seemed not to be alarmed by the sight of all the blood in the foyer, according to Brett. Yes, the story about the toilet paper phone call was very odd, and I'm not certain it was even true. Yes, Carl naively overshared with detectives that he and Leslie had physical confrontations. But people are weird, and there isn't always a neat, tidy explanation for everything, much as we would all like there to be. So as I said, other than Carl, there was not really a standout suspect. But should there have been? Within days of the murder, Lauren named Eugene Gligor as someone who was very familiar with her home and her mom. Gligor had a record of bad behavior and juvenile charges and was suspected in several burglaries and even an attack on a woman on the path near his and Leslie's homes. And a big fat tip about Eugene Gligor was called in by Gligor's neighbor Jan 9 months after the murder. Of course, police cannot run down every tip. They often receive hundreds, even thousands of baseless ones. And I'm certainly not here to act as a Monday morning quarterback and second-guess the police investigation. But it is interesting that the early investigators obtained DNA samples from the random painter on Drummond Avenue and from the deceased landlord of the home next door, and not from Gligor, who had a much more significant relationship with Leslie due to his relationship with her daughter, and who had run away to Oregon rather than attend Leslie's funeral. The one extremely frustrating aspect of the resolution of this case is that we don't have the answer to the burning question of why. Why did Gligor do what he did? There must have been a reason. This wasn't the kind of thing where he shoved Leslie and she accidentally hit her head. No, he attacked her. There was a struggle. Furniture was knocked over. Rugs were smushed up. Leslie's head was slammed over and over into the sharp corner baseboard molding. Then he strangled her until her eyes bled. That implies a kind of blind rage that most of us have never experienced, all inflicted on a woman who was so kind to and accepting of him. Why? The prosecutors told the court, quote, "Even now, he will not give Ms. Preer's family the answer to the question they have asked for 24 years, why?" The defense had basically claimed that Gligor didn't know why he did what he did, a motiveless crime. The state countered, quote, "Rather, this is a crime without a motive that the defendant is willing to admit." So what are your thoughts about why Gligor did what he did? What was he doing at Leslie's house in the first place? Do we believe him when he says he has only a vague recollection of going to the Preer house and none of killing Leslie? I don't believe for a second that he doesn't remember what happened. I think he's lying through his teeth. I think he knows exactly why he went over there and what he did. I think he went there very deliberately and sneaked in the unlocked back door in order to stay out of public view. It was, after all, broad daylight. But what was his goal? Was he perhaps hoping to run into his ex-girlfriend Lauren? Was he stalking Leslie? Was he a peeping Tom? Or, as the modern detectives believe, did he enter the house thinking that no one was home? After all, there was no car outside, the front door was locked, the dog was in the basement. Garrett said that when Gligor was dating Lauren, he routinely went over there even when no one was home. Perhaps he did it again. We know that he had committed property crimes and was suspected of stealing money from people he knew. Did he think he could steal something from the Preers? That morning, it seems to me that Leslie was preparing to iron something. The iron was turned on the ironing board in the spare bedroom upstairs. Was Leslie heating up the iron and heading to the closet to get her blouse or dress when she heard something downstairs? Did she go down there in her bra and underwear thinking it was Carl or Boomer? If that's what happened, then Gligor would have startled the absolute daylights out of her and probably panicked that she would scream. He knew she could identify him. Perhaps she even said, "Eugene, what the fuck are you doing here?" Maybe she said, "I'm calling the police." He could not let that happen. I don't like to use the expression "he snapped" because I think that implies that one has decreased accountability. Gligor is responsible for everything he did. But I think he likely went into some kind of blind rage when he either did not get what he wanted or he realized that he was caught red-handed. And that's when he went full throttle on Leslie. Then rationality returned and he went into damage control. As much as these old cases often turn on good physical evidence retention, luck often plays a significant factor. How lucky is it that Gligor cleaned up all the wrong blood? He swabbed the foyer walls and ran the shower over Leslie, but he failed to clean up his own blood on the baseboard and kitchen and back doors, and he didn't think to clean under Leslie's nails. And it's remarkable that he was comfortable taking the time to do even this. How did he know Carl would not show up at the home at any minute or Lauren would not stop by to see her mom? And what caused him to abandon the cleanup effort and bail? He left out the back door, smearing blood on it in his hurry. What he did with his bloody clothes and whatever he used to clean up the mess in the house, and how he explained the bloody scrapes Leslie had inflicted on his body, we'll never know. And we'll never know what motivated Gligor to go over there in the first place. But we do know the most important thing, really the only thing that matters, that the right man is serving a significant portion of his adult life in prison for killing Leslie Preer. After 23 years, Leslie Preer's case is closed thanks to IGG. And if you're one of the bad guys, they are coming for you. Thank you to Montgomery County Police Sergeant Chris Humrock for speaking with me about this case. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. Before you leave, please let me tell you about some important things related to the show. If you'd like to support this podcast, and in the process, get access to early and ad-free episodes, as well as bonus content like crime scene photos, you can sign up for a Patreon subscription for only $5 a month by heading over to patreon.com/DNAID. Of course, you're welcome to contribute more than $5 a month. We rely on Patreon funds to pay for the original source materials I use to research each episode. If Patreon isn't your thing, you can also show your support with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts. It costs just $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year. Your AbJack Insider subscription will give you the same benefits for not only DNA ID, but for all of the shows on the AbJack network, like Killer Communications and Campus Killings. Head over to Apple Podcasts and find the DNA ID page or look for the AbJack network to get started. If you're on social media, we'd love to interact with you there. DNA ID is on every major social media platform. Search your favorite platforms for DNA ID Podcast to find us. We also have a YouTube channel, and our website is dnaidpodcast.com. You can find links to all of these anytime in our show notes. If you need to reach the show, contact us by emailing dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Finally, if you want to pick up some fun DNA ID merch and represent the show, visit the store at www.customizedgirl.com/s/DNA ID podcast. DNA ID is researched, written, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.